Hey everybody, welcome back to the Spinner Rack. I'm here with my boy Cal. Say what's up, Cal.
Hey, what's going on? We're ready to rock with the real history.
Hey, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the Harder They Fall, the characters, the real life characters the movie is based on. We wanted to touch base on how incredible some of these guys' lives were. And during our initial review of the movie, we kept on talking about how their lives, the real life lives of some of these guys was incredible. We know the movie was, it's clearly a work of fiction, but they were real characters they put together. The James Samuel wanted to make a superhero team, and so he got all these characters from the old West and put them together. But here, Cal and I want to just go over some of the famous people that we that were in the movie that we thought should get more light, or at least expound upon the real person, because we want people to get the idea that these guys were how they appeared in the movie. So I'm going to start off with Cal. Cal, what was your take on some of the characters? You can start off with anyone you want to start with. But Reeves was my favorite, of course, one I've done the most on. But what about some of the characters? Can you tell us about some of them that you've read about, and what you know about them, and why you think their stories should be given out to people, so people can actually see and hear about these guys? We don't get to hear much about them.
Well, first, I don't want to sound like I'm correcting anybody, but rather than characters, we really got to call them historical figures. When we call them characters,
correct.
It's like we're making them up. So I did want to say that there was these comics that came out years ago called Golden Legacy, and Golden Legacy were comics that focused on contributions that Black people in America or African peoples abroad had made here and there. So they talked about everybody from Martin Luther King Jr. to Alexander Dumas to Saint Louverture to the the actual cowboys of the Wild West who were Black. So I had read this years ago as a kid. So I was familiar with all of these characters all of these historic. See, that's how it slips up. All these figures before, when I read them as when I was reading them as a kid. And the first one I was introduced to was Nat Love, also known as Red. He was known as Red River Dick and Deadwood Dick, based on some things that he had done that really, really impressed people. Nat Love was born a slave, but he learned to read and write, which was illegal at the time. And then he was freed sometime later and went on to become a cowboy. So he was an actual cowboy. He had to deal with people who were rustlers. He had to deal with inclement weather, but he was deemed to be an excellent shot, really good at his job. And then he goes on to create a name for himself when he enters a contest. And in the contest, they have things like sharpshooting, lasso tying, all of these particular things. And he wins every contest hands down. And after that, because I believe the contest was in Deadwood, I forget the exact area, but the city or the actual place was called Deadwood, he was given the nickname of Deadwood Dick. And he goes on to have a series of adventures afterwards. I don't want to get into all of them, but one in particular that stands out, that he was abducted by Native Americans, and they took a liking to him, wanted to make him part of the tribe, wanted him to marry him off to one of their daughters. And I guess he played along just long enough to sneak out of there and escape. And then he went off, when his cowboy days were over, I believe he became a Pullman porter, and he wrote all of his adventures in, the Nat Love, the Adventures of Nat Love, otherwise known as Deadwood Dick. So this is he has a lot of great stories, and it's a firsthand account of what cowboy life was like. And it's just a great overall, you get a touch of it in the comics that were put out, but if you get the chance to ever go over his life story, just, real fun stuff to read. And then, of course, people will say, well, how much exaggerated is it? I was like, well, no more exaggerated than any of the tales of Wild Bill Hickok, or I'm thinking Tombstone, great, now his name is escaping me, or any of those figures who came out with the shootout of the OK Corral. I'm sure his name will came back to me before we're done with the show. But Nat Love is the first one that jumps to mind.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought Nat Love up, because he is definitely a very interesting character in and of itself. All of them have very interesting lives. They don't live a one-dimensional life that people say, oh, that he's in the he or she is in just the westerns. Just the end of his life, he went on to become a Pullman porter. You know what I'm trying to say? This was a union. This is a Pullman company. This is back when everybody was taking trains, which was basically made up of African American porters, and they unionized. And they were definitely instrumental, a force to be reckoned with in labor. They definitely helped legislation. So there was a lot of stuff that they were able to do, and also they brought a lot of African Americans who were porters into the middle class. They were like, I guess, the stewardess of the airplanes or stewards of the airplanes now. But he was that too. That just showed you his whole life legacy. He was enslaved. He became a cowboy. He became famous for his exploits. He became then a Pullman porter, which is something that even to this day, I think a lot of people don't recognize how important they were to contributing to the African American middle class, fighting for rights, especially in the era of segregation. I mean, his life is amazing. And you're right. When people say, "Hey, his autobiography," hey, these guys tell tall tales. They all told tales back then. But I think there is a lot of times there's incredible truth in many of the things that are being said. Nat Love was definitely somebody that you know you when you read his story, you're like, my goodness, it's like when you read it, you're like a kid and you're like, that's an adventure story I would love to have been part of. This is the type of stuff that people will run away and say, hey, I want to go out west and I want to be just like this person. That's how I felt when I read it. I don't know if that was how you felt. You know, and it for me, my encountering of I love the westerns growing up until I was told, oh, this is such a bad thing and you shouldn't watch it because how they treat the American Indians, and that's a whole nother argument. I understand that, but the native,
Yeah,
the Native
that's a
Americans,
whole other thing.
is a whole nother thing. But there was also a group who were saying, "Hey, you guys weren't even part of it. African Americans weren't even part of the West." And it took actually the funny thing. It really took Jamaicans that I encountered who were huge Western fans who put me on to the whole history of African Americans in the American West, and for that I'm very thankful for. But the very fact that you had to go get people from outside the country who knew some of that history to do it, and I said, oh, I gotta.
Well, yeah, I mean, the I'm not sure how prominent it was in the rest of in the Caribbean, but in Jamaica, a lot of those dime store novels would have been prevalent and easy to get, in terms of the reading culture, especially if the people they were reading about were black. So that would have just been commonplace. But it was also what I also liked about it. Since I read it as a kid, it wasn't like these guys were really like black cowboys. They were cowboys. So I
Yeah,
guess if you're older now, you never knew about this. You're like, oh, I didn't realize they were black cowboys, and I'm like, what? I was a kid when I read most of this stuff. So these are just other cowboys at the end of the day. So if you said Wild Bill Hickok or Doc Holliday, and then you said, oh, Jim Beckworth or Nat Love, I would be like, oh, okay, fine. Bill Pickett, hey, no problem. These were just some of the, the more popular cowboys around that time, around the same, Billy the Kid, no problem. Cherokee Bill, oh, okay, yeah, good. All these names you would have been familiar with, just as knowing these particular figures as, names out of the gunfighting West. So but it does show you like how the different perspective it is. There's less surprise there's less surprise the earlier you are when you're exposed to it. And it's a different perception the earlier you are when you're exposed to it.
yeah,
All right,
and
so
one thing, and before we go on to that, just one thing I think that I don't know if you remember these guys, but where we grew up in Brooklyn, there were black cowboys who actually rode horses
yeah,
throughout Brooklyn, and again, that was another pretty eye-opening thing when I first encountered them too. And they were basically, I mean, like I said, we were introduced to them through some of the Jamaicans in our neighborhood who knew some of these guys, and it was very interesting where they were giving you the history of what they did, because they were talking about that a lot of them came from the South, and they were talking about what their families did and the history, and again, it was eye opening. But what I found is that there was a movie by Idris Elba a couple of years ago where he was he managed a horse stable. I think it was in Baltimore, and he had his son come stay with him, and how he was connecting with, that this was part of the culture. Living with as a cowboy, I guess a modern day cowboy, was something that he was the people did and lived with. Let us say while he was living in the house, not crazy, but it was just something that connected him, and I always found that fascinating. And then you see these other things that these black cowboys were just not just now in Brooklyn or Baltimore, but you see the chapters in Los Angeles, you see chapters in Chicago. So it's a much bigger thing than a lot of people understand or give it credit for. But I'm glad it is coming out now. The more this comes out, the better it is for everybody to understand that everybody contributed to the great quilt that is America. So next one, hit us. What about Cherokee Bill? We want to start off with.
Never really liked him. Bill Pickett.
Okay. So give us a little bit about him. What's up?
Bill Pickett, and I said this in our other show, is, I believe, I don't know if he's the only, but he is inducted, into the Rodeo Show Hall of Fame, which is a really big deal because, I don't think a lot of people understand what it's like to actually do a rodeo. You're risking your life. Okay. And the stuff that Bill Pickett was really known for was that he could actually wrestle. This guy was wrestling steer, meaning a bull would come out and he would wrestle it into submission. It might take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and he was able to do that. I guess one of the better stories that I remember is that they did a show in Mexico, and the Mexican guys didn't want to pay out the money. So they were like, look, regardless of how long this guy goes, don't stop the wrestle. Don't stop the wrestle with the bull. And finally, Pickett's guys got wise to it. They were like, they're going to leave him out here until he dies. So they had to, shut the whole thing down. But this is a grown man who was bare hand wrestling bulls at the end of the day. Just some really phenomenal stuff. And, as a kid, I didn't realize how big it was until, you finally get to a zoo and you see something like an ox there and you're like, wow, it's quite, big. And then you get an idea of his dimensions as a guy as well. And, I was just, he always impressed me the most because of the things that I know that he was capable of doing in rodeo, but especially what they would call was they would call it doggy punching, which is pretty much wrangling a steer. But that really impressed me, the physical strength that he would have had to have in order to be capable of doing something like that. And not for a few seconds. We're talking, this guy could do this for minutes on end. And a good period of, some of the times the bull submitted. That's saying a lot. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of technique to it, but the raw physical strength he must have had, I always was really impressed by it.
Yeah, I mean, those guys, those guys, I don't think you can get life insurance having that job. Yeah.
No, you can't.
But what's also interesting about him is that wasn't he also performing with Will Rogers? He was performing with Buffalo Bill.
Yeah.
And
yeah, he would have crossed paths. Any of those, like Annie Oakley, Buffalo Bill, Will Rogers, any of those guys that you would have that would be names, from the rodeo shows. Yeah, he would have crossed paths, and they would have known him as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, this is stuff that's there. It just hasn't been pushed upon. I mean, the very fact that it took until 1971 for the National Cowboy Western Heritage Museum to bring him on, it's indicative of people just forgetting that, hey, these guys did a lot of the things that they were doing. But let's not forget that they have appeared in some movie. I remember Lonesome Dove. There was who was the actor? I thought he played Bill Pickett in the role, but I'm not 100% sure. Back in Lonesome Dove, let me just check real quick. I think it was Lou Gossett Jr. Yeah, he played a combination of Bill Pickett and someone else. But we've seen snapshots of these characters, these real historical people, and some of the things they've done. But you don't see like a full-blown movie of their life, a full-blown documentary to explain, hey, what's going on with these guys, what happened and stuff. But yeah, I thought Bill Pickett was fascinating because just the very fact that now he's being recognized. Also the fact that we heard about Buffalo Bill, we heard about Will Rogers, went on to become huge stars and made tons of money, but unfortunately we don't hear about him.
Well, he has an ironic death as well. Because he retires from doing rodeo shows, and then he ends up being kicked. He ends up being kicked. I'm not sure if it was in the head or in the body. I think it was in the head, but he's kicked by a bronco and he's killed.
Get out of here.
So
what?
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah, it's like all those rodeo shows, and he comes out and he's okay, and then he's over here outside of the show. He gets kicked by a bronco and he ends up dying from that injury. So an ironic death to say the least. But I don't want him to go. I mean, the thing is, he's not unsung, and I don't want, because all this stuff is out there if you actually have any inclination to really know about it. Okay, because it's not one of these situations you go, oh, I didn't learn this in school. Did you care? Did you actually care? Because the stuff is out there if you really want to know it. And he's inducted into the Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame. So it's not like he was not, anybody who's done rodeos, they know this guy. Okay, they know this guy. His name at one point, Bill Pickett, successful rodeo. Bill Pickett must be a good rodeo. Bill Pickett, let's go see that rodeo. That's the name brand. That's the name brand that he had. So, and I'm, it's just, for me, it's like that one. I can understand if you don't know Nat Love or Cherokee Bill or, even Jim Beckworth. But Bill Pickett, that's, if you're somebody who's really, interested in history or Black cowboys, if you will, and you've never heard of him, what can I say? You're really not stepping up. That has to be the one that you would know.
Wow. I mean, that's definitely cool. That's definitely, yeah. I mean, one thing I gotta also say is that, the Lonesome Dove novels and the shows that they had on, I think it was CBS. I don't know if you ever saw any of them.
Say that again, Lonesome Dove?
Lonesome Dove.
I don't remember if I saw any of those.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
They had the novels by an author named Larry McMurtry, and they definitely had some African American characters. I mean, in some of the shows, not all of them, but definitely had a couple of them. And that's why I was saying, like, it was Gossett Jr. And I remember seeing it. It was a big deal back when I was growing up in Brooklyn, and I was like, wow, that they actually had some of these characters. I wish they were more fleshed out, but the very fact they were also bringing some of them in, that they were in such a very popular novel and such a very popular TV show, that they actually brought these things out. And I thought that was pretty, again, like you said, the information is there. It's just a question of people just going out and seeing some of it. And even
it's interest.
I think Lonesome Dove production was actually Lonesome Dove, the series was made by Motown, which just tells you, isn't that crazy that they were involved in that?
Well, you would have to think that any Black people who immigrated from the South, or to the West, they knew these people. They already knew these cats already. And, it wasn't like that you couldn't have, they probably knew about them, read about them, so it wasn't a big secret. So it's just basic interest. If you have any interest in this, you can, it's not like this is hidden, it's not like in some secret tomb and you got to come over there like Indiana Jones to go find and see, look, they've been hiding the information. No, the guy's he's in the Hall of Fame. So it's, literally, it's like saying, hey, I don't know. It's kind of like not realizing that James Brown is in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It would be something akin to that at the end of the day. But all that stuff is there. I mean, there's going to be people who are more obscure, than other people. But Bill Pickett, that's top shelf right there. There's no way. There's just no way. If you can't say that you've had an interest, didn't know about it, and you never heard of it.
Okay, well, let's go to probably one of the most, of all renowned, I would say, African-American cowboys, the Marshal himself. It was
Bass Reeves.
Bass Reeves. I mean, we got to say Bass Reeves. I mean, he was pretty amazing that he was the first African-American deputy west of the Mississippi River. He basically worked around the Oklahoma territory, which is also back then was still you had Native Americans, unfortunately, who were placed there. But he is recorded, according to Wiki, he's recorded having over of 3,000 arrests of dangerous criminals. That
sounds about right.
That number is staggering. If it's true,
they kept them busy.
And he, like some of the others we talked, was born into slavery. I'm trying to say.
Yep.
It's just amazing. These guys, they came out of slavery and they didn't like wilt. They said we had to do something. They had to take advantage of living. I'm just he. Just
well. I know you're being kind to the listeners over here because I know how good you are with history. Anybody who knows the Wild West, just about everything that happens is after the Civil War, and then there's a push to go west afterwards. A lot of the Confederacy, these cats like Billy the Kid, who is this? Jesse James. Those guys were Confederate soldiers.
Yep.
And a lot of these guys, they went west because they were under such hard manners by the federal government because, they had been Confederate soldiers and because of the areas that they lived in. So a lot of these guys pushed west. But then you also had a lot of the, slavery ends and, freed blacks also push west, because they're like, look, we can try something new out there because the South wasn't necessarily, this favorable place. Like, hey, everybody's free. Like, nah, we're still kind of, we're still kind of angry at you guys, but we had nothing to do with it. You know what? Go west. So you had homesteading wasn't limited, and so a lot of the cowboys that you're getting, if you'll see that same thing. You'll see these cats. Oh, I didn't realize these guys fought for the Confederacy. Oh, well, why were all these guys former slaves? Because of the time period. Also, that period of the Wild West, a lot of people think it's longer than it is, but it's like a 10-year period, because the stories that were getting back to the East were these wild stories of shoot ups and people being killed and lawlessness, and the government was like, no, we got to put the clamps on this. We got to shut this down. So they sent the military out there. And what we know and glorifies the Wild West is a really short period of time. I don't know even if it was 10 years, but the whole idea of guys walking, cowboys, guns on your hip, that sort of stuff. That was a very short period of time in American history, even though it's really glamorized. But I know you didn't want to sound paternal to anybody, so I did it for you.
But you're right. I mean, it's a very short period of time, and some of the characters that are pretty well known come out of the whole Civil War era, either as Confederates or Union soldiers. I mean, in this case, we have Bass Reeves. He was actually forced to go with his, I guess it was a slave master or a relative of a slave master who was a Confederate,
Right.
and he was able to escape and live with the Native Americans in Oklahoma, which helped to teach him how teach him some of their skills, so that when they were looking for deputy sheriffs, he was there. He was one of the ones that they were able to get, and of course he became highly successful. I mean, he was a farmer. I mean, that's what he was, but he was able to change that. I mean, and it's just amazing. I mean, some of the stories of some of the guys he captured. Some of these were hardcore criminals. Others were just people who were just skip bail or whatever. But this guy was no joke.
These are guys who would shoot to kill a lawman. They would shoot to kill a sheriff. They would shoot to kill a deputy. They would shoot to kill the military. And he was black. So they would have no problem shooting him either. And if there's ever somebody who was good at their job, it was Bass Reeves, without a doubt. At the end of the day, there was I think there was a film that was done on him. I mean, there was a lot of attention paid to him because of the Watchmen series on HBO.
Right.
And that was the first introduction, for some people to Bass Reeves. They were like, "Oh, I thought he was just a character created for Watchmen." Like, no, this is a real guy.
Nah, that's a real
And
guy.
so they did do a short film with a British actor on him, but I watched some of it. I didn't really care for it too much. It just wasn't very compelling. But I'm also very the first westerns that I watched that really brought me in were the spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood. So for me, that's always like this high bar. And like, okay, you want to bring me in? I really want the drama. But then they're basing those on the samurai epics, like Yojimbo, that type of stuff. So I'm like, okay. So I don't know how much you can do with that and still maintain the story with Bass Reeves. But the story, I saw it and I just like, this is not as entertaining as it could be with somebody who has this much history behind them as a sheriff. What they chose to show and how they chose to depict him. But again, history's there.
I mean, that's the craziest thing. I mean, the one thing about history, things go all over the place, and when people start saying, "Oh no, it has to be this way," you're like, "No, it doesn't." Life is a lot more complicated and interesting than you would ever believe. To this day, I think one of his descendants is a hockey player, Ryan Reeves. Um,
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
he played for the New York Rangers. And some other teams, but you're like, wow. I mean, that's just one of his descendants. But Reeves. One of the things I also not like, but one of the things that was very interesting about his story is that I remember reading that his son had killed his wife, the son had killed his own wife, right? And so, as opposed to having anyone else go and take care of that duty, he himself decided he had to do it. He was a man who had to bring in his own son. That's how dedicated to doing his job, and that's how he felt that he was responsible for some of the stuff because he knew his own son. That is crazy. You're bringing in your own son.
Yeah, that's pretty hardcore.
Yeah,
Because I don't see either one of us doing that.
yeah. Bruh, I can't. I said, hey, so let's talk. Anyone else you want to discuss? Anybody else you want to touch base on?
Jim, we got to do James Jim Beckworth. Have to
Okay.
do him. This is, oh man. No, I'm not even going to say that because that would be, I hate it when people say that. Sorry to think out loud. But this is, oh man. Hey, if you saw Tombstone and the way that they portray Doc Holliday as this guy is like, look, if you get into, you remember the scene in Tombstone where, he thinks it's Wyatt Earp who's going to show up and Doc Holliday shows up and he's like, hey, Doc, maybe we can talk about this. And he's like, I'm your Huckleberry. He's like, no. He's like, it's me and you. It's me and you. And he already realizes, no, with Wyatt Earp, he may have had a chance. But Doc Holliday, you're like, oh, no, that's like, it's like I just signed my own death warrant. It's like you're tired of living. You want to shoot against Doc. That was James Beckworth. He was, I think what was the nickname they gave him? The Bloody Arm or something of that nature? Because he was that quick on the draw. Okay, so if you were messing with him, you were definitely tired of living. All right, that's the guy. And it's one of the reasons why really upset me with the film, because this character, the character that they create isn't him at all, doesn't get a shot off. We don't get to see him do anything. What's the one thing that one of the staples of the Westerns is that, okay, we're going to have that, that shoot off. Okay, who's the quickest on the draw? Who's the fastest draw? That sort of thing. Straight rawhide kid type of thing.
Right.
And this is a guy who legitimately was that fast, was that good. And what they show in the film pretty much chumps him at the end of the day. I was just like, oh, that was like, my head just hurt watching it. But, he has an interesting backstory as well. He's born a slave, but his father was the master of the plantation who actually frees him. I don't know how young he was when he frees him, but he frees him and then he apprentices him to a blacksmith so he can learn the trade. Then he goes on to, have this incredible career with a gun at the end of the day, retires later on. Some great pictures of him too, just like this hair, just really hair that, it's like so full and wild at the end of the day when you look, let me not say, I don't know, it looks wild. It looks like the way it's styled, it looks like it's just like a strong breeze going all the time. But you just look at this guy and you can imagine the stuff that you could have, he's got the handle, almost like the handlebar mustache, the hair, the look. And then you could just see him in the gun. Just when this guy shows up, you're like, oh man, hey, can we talk about this, Jim? Can we talk about this? Just the images alone, and then the stories that go along with them. He's a really, really intriguing figure of the Old West. And if you're like me and you're one of these guys who lives for that, that part of the thing, was like, okay, let's see who's the quickest on the draw. This is one of your guys. This is not a sharpshooter. Okay, this is somebody who was gonna, okay, let's go 10 paces, turn, fire, boom. Who's always standing? The bloody arm. Okay, Jim Beckworth.
I know, and there are unfortunately also some with Beckworth. You have the whole thing with his military service and his campaign against some Native American ethnic groups. And can't say whether he was there or not. They say that he was, but then
probably was.
Yeah, but they also it's because they said when he died, he was given a traditional Crow Native American funeral, but can't get away from the Cheyenne, the whole thing where they had the whole Sand Creek massacre, where some defenseless Native Americans were massacred. So it's.
We could do a show on that.
We have to balance it out, just
See, we could do a show on that, and I know we've probably spoken about this stuff off, off camera and everything, but that would make for another show. But that is. I hate to do all the cliches, but it's just a really complex situation. It's not just as clear cut as, especially now, because a lot of times they want to throw like left leaning guilt at everybody for anything bad or anything, any sort of thing that can be deemed an atrocity, that happened. And you really have to examine that with whole eyes as to what was going on at that time. And don't want to just paint a broad brush with anyone, especially not James Beckworth.
Right. And I agree. I don't want to paint a broad brush, but I just also want to make sure that we're not also. No one is without issue. And again, like I said, there is evidence that he was there, that or but there's also evidence that he wasn't. So I've heard different takes from different people. I haven't myself studied the whole thing, but at the same time, that was definitely one of the a very traumatic point where you have defenseless people who ended up um, dying, and that's not cool at all. And I'm not saying,
No,
but I mean, within his life, we're definitely selling the fact of what he did, and this is something that happened after he had, you know, a long time in his career, what he was doing. So yeah,
yeah.
it's tough. I just
I
want
mean,
to make a mention because
he would make a.
so
This is a guy who would make for. I mean, in terms of doing another show, you could definitely do another show because when I say the complexity, this is somebody who lived with the Crow Indians
yeah,
for years, and he's
exactly.
buried there. So you really have to go into it. You really want to go into. You have to go into a little bit more, but that's not what this show's about.
No, no, and I agree, and I think we need to understand that within, like you said, there's different complexity in terms of different Native American groups. That some you were probably closer to, some you're not, and but we'll that's another day we can talk about. It's also particularly interesting that I mean, like I said, that his father that got him got tried to get him an apprenticeship, got him an apprenticeship, and then he ended up
Yeah,
leaving that. It's it also shows to me, at least in terms of slavery, where people are like they make it like it's just cut black and white, like oh, these guys were enslaved, and the evil slave masters just did this, and they didn't give them any chance. But you see in some of these stories that their parent, if they were mixed race and they were products of enslaved individuals, um, and their masters, is that you do see that sometimes they were given support. Either they recognize them still as their family. There was one, try to get them married off. In some of these stories, it's pretty interesting. It's just like it's not like I'm the evil slave master, and I don't care about these guys. I'm just producing them to make more slaves. You know what I'm trying to say? It's more.
yeah. I mean, in
More to
certain cases, in certain cases, it's as much as I hate saying it, it's complex. Okay, and I'm somebody who believes in black and white. At the end of the day, I don't really believe in a lot of gray area. But even even black and white can be complex at the end of the day. And the cases are not as open and shut. And if you
Thank you.
believe they were open and shut, then you have James Beckworth as someone who says, "Well, look, this is not an open and shut type of case." But it's again, it's more history to delve into if you have a genuine interest.
Yeah, it is. It is. So who else do you want to delve into, my friend?
I'm pretty good. Okay, I think there was one there was one figure that I was unfamiliar with. It wasn't stage was it Stagecoach Mary?
Stagecoach Mary.
I don't
Yes.
think it I don't think it was Stagecoach Mary. I think it was the other character played by uh I'm just getting horrible with names. I know them before we start the show and then they just start
Mary
blank
Fields is
out.
her name. Mary Fields is her name.
Trudy.
Yeah, Trudy in the
What's her name?
show.
Yeah, on the show playing Trudy. Yeah, her character. Only because she worked for the post office and she was like in her 60s when she took up that job. So and for people who really everybody thinks of the post office now, oh, this is a terrible job. These are just people who lose your mail and so on and so forth. In those days, working for the post office was dangerous because people would rob the mail because people sent money through the mail. So they would go, I mean, Jesse James did it, Billy the Kid did it. They would come over there and they would rob, they would go over there and rob the mail and they'd go through all the mail. Okay, who has some money in here? And they would take the money and they would move on because that was the only way to really send money for the most part, unless you had it was a way that people actually used to do it. So, I was very interested to find out about her because I had not heard of her before watching the film. So I'm thankful to the film for that much. The other thing is that the whole thing, when you drive in a car and guys are like, oh, yeah, shotgun. That's where you get the term from. She was a shotgun. The shotgun when you were doing the stagecoach, the shotgun was the person who was defending the stagecoach. So you had the driver, and then you had the person who was there with the shotgun. And then of course, if the guys come over, those wranglers, these come over. Oh no, it's Jesse James. It's the shotgun's the job to shoot, keep these guys off until you can get away or they give up. And that was the role that she was playing. And she was in her 60s when she was doing this. I'm like, okay, talk about one hard traveling cowgirl. Okay. Like, all right.
I mean, it's interesting. She did grow up. She did live in a nunnery, and you'd figure that she would not want to be part of the whole guns and actions. You figure that she would be that she would not be into that, right? But clearly, like you just said, I mean, she was a gun-toting, profane, talking woman who, while she worked for the nuns and understood them and dealt with them, she also said, "Hey, I got to make a living, and making a living being I guess security on a stagecoach." I don't know if she was actually hired by the postal service or worked, like how we would have now, like UPS and FedEx, where they would, give off some of their mails for certain
Well,
areas.
she didn't. Yeah, you're right. She didn't work for the post office. I think she was contracted.
Right. I think that's it.
That's how it worked. So she was never like a post office employee, because then of course, if there was ever a post office employee who should be given, like, oh, Hall of Fame, yeah, right over here.
Which is
But yeah,
fascinating. It's a woman, for goodness sakes, and you'd figure the guy's like, "Oh, we're going to take this girl out," but they're like, "Nah, she got the, this is Stagecoach Mary. Leave her alone." you know, it's
yeah,
crazy. And I think I'm reading here that they said that Stagecoach Mary, that she the town of Cascade celebrated her birthday each year, you know, um, and that she was exempt, where they put saloons, where they banned people from going into saloons, women from going into saloons. She had an exemption. And like you said, she
hey,
started this whole thing pretty late in life, doing the postal service. She was like 60 years old. She retired at
yeah,
71. I mean, 71. Are
yeah.
you
But these
freaking
people
for
were. I mean, these are some really. I don't think a lot of people get. These are some really tough cats.
Oh,
Okay, this is a time period when people were, tough. You didn't have any medical benefits. You got a toothache, you're just walking around tough. Nothing.
it's
So of
funny you
course,
brought
so
that
of
up.
course somebody comes. So of course somebody comes over here trying to do some nonsense. You're like, I've been waiting to shoot somebody. I've been waiting. You want to rob this here mail? I got a toothache that's just got your name all over it. Come on over here. Waiting to shoot people.
It's funny you say that because it's I was having a conversation with somebody recently where we are talking about, who is a tougher soldier, a Roman legionnaire or an American soldier with all their, special ops soldier with all their training and stuff. And I said, in technique, it's probably going to be the American special armed forces person, but someone who can handle hardship and deal and handle. I mean, these guys fought hand to hand. There was no let's shoot you from a mile away, or half a, 300 yards. No, it's going to be hardcore. They could take bruises. They can live on the land. It's, I mean, the things that we take for granted, these guys dealt with it as regular stuff. They could sleep on. They don't need to sleep on a bed or a cot. They could sleep on a floor. They were used to that. They can eat. They could probably take the standard water. I mean, not everywhere, because we know the Italians were drinking, you know, a lot of wine. Not the type of wine we drink now. Much more just to make sure the water was good. But it's just, a different level of hardship that people endured as a regular experience that we have no idea now in
Yeah.
our in our society.
To be fair, I mean, most soldiers are outfitted so they can do what's necessary to exist out there and still have the strength to fight, you know, at the end of the day, regardless of what that may be. I will give that the average Roman soldier was probably a much better drinker than the modern soldiers, because that wine they were drinking is nothing close, to what we're drinking right now. The alcohol content, oh sweet grace, that was some strong stuff at the end of the day. Even though most people, especially Europe, would have been drinking, wine or something that was fermented because of the problems that they had with
Yep,
water purity, you know,
exactly.
at in those times. But just some, these are some hard traveling people. What are these hard traveling heroes? Just tough.
I mean, and that brings us to the thing of the whole Wild West. At that time, you had Oklahoma Territory. Montana was just becoming a state, or was still a territory. You had the railroad had not really was just connecting the country together. And so I think after the passage, when all these territories became states, they had governors and money coming in for state police and money from the federal government, and you have the railroad connecting a lot of these things. A lot of this started dying out because there was now organization. The
Yeah.
territories a bit more. Yeah, you had a governor, but they were still trying to figure out the rules. And things, the rules weren't being covered. And let's not forget, there weren't a lot of people. It's not like back east where you had millions of people in New York and the Eastern Seaboard, where in these countries, in these counties in the West, you had just a couple thousand sometimes. And they're
I
really
mean, when you think about it, it's still like that in comparison to the concentration of people that we have here in the East Coast, or even like the tri-state area of New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, even going down to Philadelphia if you want to add one more in. There's just a larger concentration of people. You go out west, it's a lot more spread out, less population. So, there's still a lot of similarity, but I get what you're talking about because you're coming from, say, a city like New York at that time period with hundreds of thousands of people. And that's just, New York City. And then you're going out to some place like Wyoming and you got like what, 2 or 3,000 people, populating it, at least just to start. And then, you say you have a governor, like governor what? There's nothing out there. It's just some trees, and a bunch of trees and cows running around. Hopefully they vote for you.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and like I said, the whole West, that time is over. I mean, at that time, like what they're saying, between 1860 to 1890, that was basically the era. I mean, and of course, in different places it changed, and of course, in some places it lingered on. Um, but it was over by that time. By that time, the United States was, most of the states in the Union were in. You know. And things were regularized. You couldn't do the things that could get away with at the time. You shot somebody in Texas, you go to Oklahoma, or you go to Arizona, or you go to Nevada, you go to even Montana, Kansas. Kansas was settled, but I'm just saying in terms, it was still a little loose in terms of. But after that, after the railroads, and that's one thing. One of the things that bound the country together, things changed. And like we were just saying just before, one of our was it we're saying he became a porter. Was it Beckworth? It wasn't Beckworth. It was
Nat
Nat
Love.
Love. Nat Love became, which is a fascinating thing in his career, that he becomes um, a Bowman. Which is a whole nother thing, and the importance of them, at least in African American history and labor history, in the United States history. The Pullman Porter, their union and stuff. So yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. I couldn't find anything on Trudy. Trudy, I was thinking Stagecoach um, Stagecoach Mary was Trudy, but no, that was
No,
Zazie.
yeah,
Right.
I
So
was con- no, I was con- yeah, I was confusing the two. I mean, I tried to find stuff on her, but I mean, they said she was an actual figure, but there's very, very little known about her, which of course makes me wonder, well, why did you use her? But then I can say, well, why did you do any of the stuff you did in this particular film? But I wasn't able to turn anything up based on the name.
okay. So what about Cherokee Bill?
I'm
His,
not.
his original name.
I'm just not a fan of Cherokee Bill, from what I read. The guy was a bad guy.
Well, yeah, he was a bad guy. I mean, let's just say he was outlaw. Without a doubt. You know.
Cherokee Bill, the Buck Gang. Those guys were just. I was never cool with them. I was never somebody who was like, oh, Jesse James was misunderstood. Like, no, Billy the Kid. Well, okay, I saw Young Guns. So after I saw Young Guns, I was like, yeah, Billy the Kid. You know, and then you learn a little bit more, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe not so much. Maybe not so much of what I've seen over here. I was just never really into the. I was never into those particular figures when I read when I read and learned about them. I just found those guys to be. I mean, they're like traditional Wild West villains. They're coming in, they're sticking people up, and they're killing people without regard.
Oh yeah, exactly. And he was mixed with Native American, Cherokee, African American, European. So it wasn't just a simple thing where people were like, hey, this guy is. He was basically what the country was out that time. People mixed, and he, so I mean, the depiction of him is very different than what you were going to find in Harder They Come. So people are going to come and say, "Oh, wow, this no, it wasn't exactly like that." He was a bad guy. Let's not call let's call it what it is. I'm trying to say it was, and and because of what happened, he ended up hanging. I mean, I don't know how much opportunities there are, but still, some of the things that he did were not necessarily the way to go about things.
Well, the Wild West bad guys are the precursor to like the 1920s Tommy gun toting gangsters, where
Yep.
they go, you get into this thing. I mean, Jesse James is a very good example of it. You go, you do these robberies, you get this money, and then they don't know how to get out of it because the money goes, and the only thing you know to do is another stick up or to do another hit, and then eventually these guys get wise to you. I mean, I thought the last people, or at least to the best of my knowledge, the last people I know who were able to really get away with something before they put the clamps on was like Bonnie and Clyde, because these guys would rob a bank and cross state lines and so on and so forth. But then after a while, they were like, "Look, we gotta, this whole crossing state lines can't happen. Okay, if you're wanted here, you got to be wanted everywhere. You know, because of the type of stuff that the type of stuff that was going on. But they were, they come over. Cherokee Bill, perfect example, comes over. You do one hit, and then it just snowballs into the point that they got to catch you. They got to catch you, and then you got to swing. Because if not, you're gonna. What is it? Law and order. You can't just put two guns on your hip and decide, hey, on your respective hips, and decide, hey, I'm gonna go for mine. Like, no, you will not go for yours. You will swing if you try to do this, and let this be an example to anybody else who wants to try it.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. And again, his crew was definitely Native American, which would definitely have been very um, scary to a lot of people at that time. His gang, I think, was the Cook Gang, that they were terrorizing. They were not terrorizing. They were robbing. Let's say robbing and killing people who were. But the same thing goes with the Rufus Buck Gang, which is a mixed gang also of African Americans and Cree Indians, or mixed Cree Indians.
Yeah. Were there Mexicans in that gang as well?
Uh,
In the Buck gang, Rufus Buck.
I'm not sure. I mean, I wasn't exactly sure all the members of the gang, but I wouldn't doubt it. I mean, this is a time when people going back and forth between different areas, and it just shows you also a lot in all of these stories. We see that Native Americans are involved in all these stories, and the African Americans are constantly connecting with them. Mixing, dealing with them. I mean, because the West back then was definitely a lot of Native Americans, not what we are accustomed to seeing nowadays, but they were there.
No, not at all. Yeah.
So
I
it's
mean, it's I mean, for that time period, and these are before, these are before like the final Indian Wars, if you will, occurred. But yeah, it would have been more of a common. It would have been it would have just been a commonality expected at that time.
right. It's there, and I guess he was also hung by the same judge by who hung Cherokee Bill, Judge Isaac
Yep.
Parker, who was also the I believe who was the judge who started looking for deputy marshals, who hired who Reeves, who had Bass Reeves hired. So that's interesting. You have the good, and you have the bad. And this one judge is the hanging judge, Isaac Barker, who was famous for, trying to, I guess, chill, put some law and order into the West, as it is. I mean, nowadays, do we even consider Oklahoma and Arkansas the West? Whenever I think West, I think like Texas and Arizona, and New Mexico and stuff. And we have the John Ford movies that we think, where he is, with Monument Park, where he used to film all the time, and that's what I always think of the West. But Oklahoma, Arkansas,
all of that stuff, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Oregon, Wyoming, all that stuff. That's all the West.
Yeah, I know. It's just that Oklahoma.
I'm not talking I'm not talking straight up geography, but yeah, that's the West. That's the West.
One of the first movies I always recall. I mean, two things. I always recall Stagecoach. That was a movie with John Wayne on it. He's on a stagecoach, and he's like he's an outlaw. He falls in love with this woman of not perfect repute, as we may say. And I was fascinated by that. Fascinated by that movie. And then you have John Ford and his other movies with John Wayne, and it was like, wow, these epics were just crazy, and you're like, wow, this is what the West is. But then, of course, as we get older, we start hearing a lot more complexity on what they do. And Stagecoach was a movie done by John Ford. You know, The Searchers, another movie that I feel was done by John Ford. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, you know, that was John Ford, and that was with that
You
was
see True
John Wayne.
Grit? You ever see True Grit?
I saw True Grit, but that wasn't John Ford. That was just John Wayne.
No, I'm just saying in terms of a Western, True Grit. I thought
Yeah.
that was that and the remake were pretty good. Both of those are pretty good.
Yeah, I saw it. So it to me, it's just pretty crazy. But yeah, just guys, I don't need to hold you up, but this is exactly what we just want to talk about. You know, our whole experience with the Western, our whole idea about some of these famous African or infamous African Americans who were part of the West, you know, and their experiences and how it helps to contribute. And the information, like we've said, is right there. You can look on Wiki. There are books. What's the name of that book that you were reading before when you were younger?
Golden Legacy comic books.
Golden Legacy comic books. You know, so I mean, these are things that are there for you to see.
You don't got time to read the whole book. Read the comic. You know, 20 minutes. 20 minutes, you know, 20 minutes or better, you can be through the comic and you'll realize, wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here I didn't know about.
Does Golden Legacy still exist?
Yeah, you can go, they still have a website, you can order the comics.
Oh wow, that's cool.
The thing is, I don't know how many printings these guys have made, so I'm always curious as to, well, what a first printing of these books go for it and how many later printings that they do, because they've never been out of print. You know, those books are there. So if you want to find them, you find them. I should have written them though and said you guys should do a new one, because there's actually, I was discussing this with somebody else, but for me it's like, anytime somebody says, oh, I didn't know this, they didn't teach me this in school, I was like, well, did you ever care? did you ever care? You know, or is it now that you care because it's glamorized or it's being publicized? I used to always have a problem anytime they would show or they would force fit somebody Black into the King Arthur mythos. You know, because there's an actual Black member of the Round Table. He's never been shown. His name is Fierfer. No. He's the brother of Percival. And but they've never shown. But I always say, look, he's out, you know, that type of stuff. If you're really interested, especially now with the technology that you have, literally a 2-3 minute Google search, and you can find most of the stuff that you're looking for, and you can really find out some good information, some historical information. And or if you're, you know, someone like me, you're into Arthurian legend and you're curious, you can find out a whole bunch of different things, and it's all there, you know, at the fingertips. Unfortunately, a lot of people look for it to, you know, continue feeling a certain way, or to have some grievance, or to continue to, you know, spout nonsense at the end of the day, you know. But if you're really looking for, you know, information, you know, you can always whittle down and get to the actual truth of it. And there's a lot of stuff there's more stuff out there now than, you know, when I was digging up historical documents years ago.
Yeah, I agree.
Or let me not say that there's more, but it's a lot easier. You know, I remember sitting in libraries going over microfilm. No more of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's yeah, I know that was a nightmare. And you know, you make a very good point. And the history is available. You just have to go out there and look for it. You know, it's all over. I think we had a brief discussion also, like the Tudor England, that they actually had. I wouldn't say slave. They had Africans who were there too, and people were like, "Huh, these guys are there? Yeah, they were there too." It's just a world. You know, people are all over. You know, all over the world. So hey, let's close it down. Any final thoughts, Cal, before we continue, before we end this up?
I think we said it all.
Okay, well, hey, at least now all I gotta say, if you like our content, give us a thumbs up, comment, you know, hey, if you don't like it, give us a thumbs down. Hey, but explain what's going on, and we will be love.
Whoa, don't give it that thumbs down. Okay.
Hey, I want to connect with people and have them.
Preferably, then, hey, if you like it, hey, thumbs up. If you don't like it, leave a comment. Let us know what you didn't like, and let's get some discussion started. Okay.
Good point. That's what I was trying to get to. Give us a comment.
Yeah, we don't need to do any thumbs downs. Okay. No thumbs downs.
Give us the comments so we can get back to you on that. All right. But hey, Spin Rack
out. Ooh, yeah, that would be a good. Well, maybe in the future. I don't know how much I could actually get out of it. His name is